Hello and welcome to the Movie Bunker podcast. It's me, Chris.
And me, Matt.
And today we've got James Hickie. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you so much, guys. A big deal to be here. Thank you.
So what is going on in the Hickie household? I mean, how's lockdown going for you?
Lockdown is very busy. I work for a charity in the day and I'm a music journalist kind of by night, although there's no gigs to go to, obviously. But there's lots to do, so that sense of purpose is really useful, and obviously it allows me to watch loads of film as well.
Revisit all those classics.
And not so classics.
How did you get into music journalism?
I always wanted to do it, and I kind of was lucky enough to work for a company that there were music titles within that, and I kind of went and knocked on the door and annoyed them until they gave me some work, and 13 years later I'm still doing it.
We've got quite a meaty challenge ahead of us this evening, James, because you chose a behemoth of a movie for us to discuss tonight.
Yeah, I've picked Kingdom of Heaven, which is came out in 2005, Ridley Scott film, all the hallmarks of Ridley Scott, and including some fairly mixed reviews when it was released.
Be without fear in the face of your enemies. Safeguard the helpless, even if it leads to your death. That is your oath. Rise a knight! Rise a knight!
What becomes of us?
The world will decide. The world always decides.
A new world. A better world than has ever been seen. There, you are not what you were born, but what you have it in yourself to be. A kingdom of conscience. Peace instead of war. Love instead of hate. That is what lies at the end of crusade. Give me a war.
That is what I do.
Defend Jerusalem. That is your oath. The king has no need of a perfect knight.
I offer you the world.
You are a princess, and I am no lord. You have my love, and my answer.
I go to pray. For what? For the strength to endure what is to come.
Oh God, it had some. Well, it got critically panned. Let's face it, and we weren't expecting it based on the fact that it come from the director of Gladiator, and it was very much in a Gladiator vein, isn't it? It's kind of really ticking all those boxes. Let me just do the plot synopsis quickly, because that's the podcast formula. Belaine of now I'm going to get all these names right. We've already mentioned we've got some cracking names here, James. We're going to have great fun. Belaine of Ibelin travels to Jerusalem during the Crusades of the 12th century.
Did that rhyme?
And there he finds himself as the defender of the city and its people. Wow.
And I realised, we did mention before on the recording of the podcast, that there's two films, and I realised the film I watched is the panned version.
Yeah, I must have done too.
The Sky version is the 2-hour, 20-minute version, which is the one I watched. Whereas the better version, the one that apparently makes a lot more sense, is like 3 hours and a bit long.
That's right. It's about 3 hours 10, and I would go as far as to say, bold claim early on, but I'd go as far as to say the director's cut is not only sort of a transformative version, has been much better than the theatrical cut, but I actually think it's better than Gladiator.
Oof.
Whoa.
Wow.
It is a bold claim.
But this is the problem with these movies, is because we did King Arthur a while ago, and we watched the unedited or the non-director's cut, which has all sorts of problems, but the director's cut is infinitely better, apparently. And I've not seen it, but yeah, in the bunker, we can't put ourselves through director's cuts. We have to go through hell before we can get the reward of the director's cut. But there's still enough in this for us to sort of, pick the bones of, I think, isn't there?
I'm starting to think our guests pretend there's director's cuts, so they can come on and go, "Oh no, the version you saw was the horrible version," and it's quite rightly so. But with the extra 17 minutes, it all really ties together wonderfully.
I think it's worth maybe talking about why there are two versions, because it's quite an interesting history if you'll indulge me as to why it's kind of happened. Obviously.
Yeah.
Ridley Scott in 2000 made Gladiator, massively lauded film, lots of awards. The next film he made afterwards was Black Hawk Down in 2001, which was, met with a lot of controversy, largely because of this sort of very jingoistic film and the sort of dehumanizing portrayal of Somalis in the film. So I think, Ridley Scott sort of has gone on record as saying that he wanted to make a film that was, a bit more of a nuanced film, because from reports, the shooting script for Black Hawk Down was actually a much more nuanced film. It was much more about the nature of conflicts and all these kinds of things, before going through the mill and ending up as the kind of very loud, very aggressive film that it ended up as. So I think basically Ridley Scott wanted to make a sort of more nuanced film, but obviously studios would want, given that he's returning to the sort of sword and sandals epic, something akin to Gladiator. So the film kind of was streamlined in order to make it more palatable length, and in doing so made it quite a dull film and sort of sanded off some of the more interesting elements of it.
Yeah, it's pretty spot on, because I think the beginning of the movie for me was kind of pricked my attention when you start to see the cast unfolding and you go, "Oh, hello," and then you go, "Oh, hello, you're in it too," and you start to think, "Oh, this is actually going to be pretty good." But then the issue I have, and it didn't really hold my attention, to be honest, because a lot of the kind of interesting characters and the interesting actors that were on screen got dispatched quite early on, and I kind of, after that, it felt like a very laboured film. And I guess, because of that edit I was watching, everything felt a little bit disjointed. But what about you, Matt? What was your take on it? Because I know you watched it pretty fresh as well.
One of my notes one of my notes was about how some of the interesting people did get killed really quickly, because obviously Liam Neeson turns up, declares himself as Orlando Bloom's dad. Orlando quickly offs a priest, jumps on his horse and goes after him. But Liam's kind of little posse are really interesting. There's a Viking one, there's a Saracen one, there's a priesty guy. And it's like, oh yeah, this is like a Dirty Dozen kind of thing. And then 2 minutes later, they're all fucking dead. And Liam Neeson's on his way out as well. It's like, oh fuck, okay. So all those, and then out of that wonderful ensemble piece, you're left with Orlando Bloom. It's like, the wrong people died here.
I think that's one of the main reasons that the theatrical cut was such a problem, is because it thrust Orlando Bloom more into the forefront of it. Yeah. When in fact he was kind of more, although he's the lead, there was kind of an ensemble of some very strong acting talent: Jeremy Irons, David Thewlis, Brendan Gleeson, Ed Norton, Liam Neeson, obviously. And it's interesting you picked up on some of the sort of early bit with the priests. That's an example whereby the theatrical cut kind of robbed some of the meaning of the film. The priest is actually, in the director's cut, revealed to be not only his half brother, but to have, because his wife had taken her own life, had actually ordered her to be beheaded when she was buried, and kind of goads him very much. But all of this was lost in the theatrical cut. So you just think that Orlando Bloom is just this really kind of hot-headed, homicidal who just kills a priest and throws him in a fire.
This is what I said to Matthew last night. I said, why did he kill him? It was just such a weird thing, because he just saw he was wearing his wife's necklace. Yes, he beheaded and he was being a bit of a jerk. Well, obviously a massive jerk. But then just to sort of push him in the molten lava pit thing, where he was doing all his making of the metal stuff, which is such an extreme reaction. Yeah, it just didn't really make any sense. And I felt a little bit cheated. We have to talk about Orlando Bloom, because why is he the lead in this movie? Is it because of Lord of the Rings and that's it? Because it can't be anything else.
I think Troy as well, wasn't he, before this?
Yeah, I think he was. I mean, at that point, he was a very bankable star, and I think, however, sometimes with these films, however big and reputable a director is, they need to have a star name for this. I have it on pretty good authority that Paul Bettany, who's a vastly superior actor and had a bit of a renaissance, having done kind of the Avengers films more recently, was kind of in the frame for that role, and I think would have been probably far less kind of movie star presence, but an infinitely better actor. So I think, the theatrical kind of puts the film very firmly on Orlando Bloom's shoulders. And those, as pretty as they are, they're not particularly strong for holding up a film like this. Whereas, especially next to some of the heavyweights that he has kind of shares the cast with.
Yeah, there's some big hitters on heavy hitters. He just looks like a stroppy and behaves like a stroppy teenager, I think, for the whole thing. He's so nonchalant.
One of my notes was I wouldn't follow Orlando Bloom to the shops, let alone to war. Because he's up there trying to give a really stirring speech, and I'd be like, oh no, I'm all right, mate. I'm fine.
You just want to go back to that little posse that you were talking about earlier on, Matthew, with the Liam Neeson and Kevin McKidd and that. Some of the great banter, for want of a better word, between those guys is brilliant, because one of them gets shot with an arrow, and Liam Neeson's famous line is, I once fought for 2 days with an arrow in my testicle. And I just thought, that's the kind of line I want in a movie. I want to see that prequel. I want to see the prequel where Liam Neeson is fighting for a day and a half, however many days he says he fights with an arrow through his testicle. That's the testicle.
I also like the directions he gives. Like when it turns out, it looks like Orlando's not going to go with them to begin with. So like they're in the middle of France somewhere, and he said, "Well, if you change your mind and you want to come to Jerusalem, you just head that way." Till they speak Italian, and then carry on for a bit.
Yeah,
till they speak something else, and then that's it. Then you're basically there, right? So I've put into Google Maps how long it would actually take to walk from Paris. I put it as Paris. It could be anywhere in France, but I thought let's go Paris because it's 38 days, and you go for like these 8 countries. It's like no, that's not good direction.
And how much of a head start did they have as well? They had pretty much a big head start on him as well. And sat in that go, I'm not sure the directions would have been. You wouldn't think it was a good omen as well if he turned up that long afterwards, and then you basically get massacred about it. Just as soon as he arrives, this army can basically kill them all off.
But then Jamie Lannister turns up with another gang who wants to arrest him for murder. And that was a nice little turn. It was a couple of Games of Thrones people in this as well. It was somebody else, but I can't remember who it was. Cast is fantastic, and it just gets better and better and better as these big hitters come on stage. And then, hit the screen, sorry. And then Edward Norton, I was looking at the cast afterwards, and I don't even remember seeing him in it. Where and when was he in it?
He's the king. He's King Baldwin, who obviously had leprosy, and
he's the one. Fucking great. He's the one in the mask. No wonder I didn't.
He was wearing the mask, and actually, that's another kind of. I'm crowbarring in a lot of the kind of alluding to the director's cut, but that's actually another. I think the cast member who gets the roughest ride in all this is probably Eva Green.
Right.
Because her character Sibylla, obviously, in the director's cut, has a son who, when Baldwin, played by Edward Norton, dies, is set to inherit the throne, but it quickly becomes apparent that he has leprosy as well. And Sibylla's character, she basically euthanizes him by pouring poison in his ear, which changes the whole dynamic of the film and her motivations, and why in the latter part of the film she kind of is really sidelined and kind of.
Oh right, so that's why she goes. That's why she goes mad.
That's why she. Because
that made no sense.
Made none whatsoever.
Oh, I feel sorry for laughing about that. That was such a horrible thing to laugh at. But just when you said poison in the air, that just. I'm sorry about that. That's so insensitive. But
that's all right. Too soon.
It's just of all the places to put it. Pop it on some ice cream.
Well, the thing is, right? I mean, I watched this last night, and this is becoming a bit of a podcast tradition for me because this is yet another film I have never seen. And
Really?
Yes, this is another movie that I've never seen, and I'm glad because in a way, I always find something nice to say about things, and I will admit I have written down some good stuff about it, so I'm not going to panic completely, but I found it so boring. But I would not have watched this film unless I would have had to. And even if you told me that the director's cut was infinitely better, I would have still struggled with the themes and the pacing of it because I don't know if I've got the patience for this sort of thing anymore. I don't know whether it's just because I'm getting old and senile or that this podcast is ruining my ability to watch decent movies.
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter of that.
Yeah. Something's happened. Something's changed. But when those sort of interesting characters are dispatched, you get a couple of other decent ones turning up when the King and Jeremy Irons and Alexander Siddig, who was fantastic. He's such a calm presence on screen. He's brilliant. But then it just there's too much going on, or not enough. I can't quite decide.
I'm just absolutely gutted about because so in my notes it was just like I couldn't for the life of me work out why Eva Green had gone mad. And now I feel like it's worse, right? So I wasted like 2 hours, 20 minutes of my life watching a film which made no sense, where for a mere 40 minutes more, I could have actually enjoyed something, potentially.
Well, James, she's underserved because she's a woman and she's in a film. So there's two things she's got, going for her that are going against her already. And this is a swinging sausage fest if ever there was one, isn't there?
I mean, in terms of actors of a certain age, there is, it's a bit of a best of. Particularly, I think, some nice kind of hammy performances from Jeremy Irons, who's always got great presence, and Brendan Gleeson in particular. But I think he's from New Zealand. The actor Marton Sokas has possibly the most hammy, almost pantomime performance in the film as Guy de Lusignan. And I pronounced that right.
Wow,
that's good. Well done. Yeah.
He's really sort of in a different film. He's almost like in a Monty Python film. He almost seems
the Holy Grail
film. He's really sort of pouting. Seems to have quite a lot of eyeliner on, and just sort of the most hateful. I mean, I understand a character has to be kind of, you have to hate a character, but there's this sort of telegraphing of him as being a bit of a wrong and right from the word go, and his performance is almost distracting. Whereas you've got kind of people chewing the scenery like Brendan Gleeson, who do it with equal relish, but with a bit more subtlety.
He's bonkers, isn't it, as well? The little dancing he does, and it's just his whole demeanour, and the way he's dispatched as well is quite unexpected. And I felt good that he died. I mean, because he was an asshole, but it was very unexpected and quite a shock. But I think, is it because of his hair? And was everyone jealous that he was able to get pink highlights? I mean, or orange highlights in his hair? What's that all about?
I mean, I'm assuming, is it supposed to be that it's red and with blood? I don't know, but it is a very interesting. I think it's called a purple rinse. I think some people call it. I think there was an older lady in Coronation Street back in the day who had a similar hairdo. But it's I mean, he's dispatched by, I would say, the Salahuddin, who's played by Syrian actor Ghassan Massoud, who I think is actually the best thing in the film, really. I think he is kind of his performance and the depiction of Salahuddin is sort of indicative of Ridley Scott's approach to a more nuanced approach to two sides of an argument that he got completely wrong in Black Hawk Down. I think he's incredible presence in the film, incredible dignity, and you see there's this really some quite one scene in particular where Baldwin and him sort of meet at the front of the battlefield and they agree not to fight. And you see that they're sort of compassionate men and have a great deep respect for one another. And I think it's really interesting, and it's sort of these moments of subtlety which are sort of offset by some really screamingly unsubtle things, like Brendan Gleeson getting his throat slit for drinking a cup of ice.
The problem with it is, in my opinion, is that Orlando Bloom just cannot pull that nuanced performance off, and that's why you get lost.
It needs a big performance, right? Because I mean, I think the benefits of this film is that it is a nice and balanced. The only kind of real villains, like James says, is the real pantomime, the Guy character. I need to ask, in the director's cut, do you actually see his end? Because in the one I watched, all you do is you see him like driving around backwards on a donkey.
There is in the director's cut is again sort of, it's not better because you're not sort of given the glee of seeing him dispatched. They have a very unnecessary short sword fight, Bailey and Guy, and basically Guy comes off in a very undignified manner and is sort of sent away.
Yeah.
I'm assuming a man, who's got no honor like that is kind of the ultimate sort of fate, worse than death, maybe.
Yeah. So aside from those villains, though, everyone else in there is always very reasonable and apparently reasonably historically accurate. Balance character was in the I can't remember what the battle's called now, but the ones where the Crusaders go off and they're far away from water and they get absolutely massacred. In the historical terms, he was actually part of that battle, was caught and was agreed to be let go as long as he didn't fight anymore. He went back to Jerusalem. They asked him to defend the city. He then sought permission from Salam ad-Din to actually sort of go, can I? They agreed, and then gave safe passage to his family so that he wouldn't have to worry about his family whilst defending the city. So it's crazy. But some of the actual those bits of it were actually historically accurate, which is kind of cool, right?
You have to be in the right frame of mind to sit through it and to want to sort of invest in that journey. And I think that's what I think maybe some people might struggle with, especially when you're presented with something that's 3 hours long. And you're going to get, a sweeping sort of sword and sandals epic, which is historically accurate, well acted, obviously with aside from the lead, generally speaking, it's well acted, but it's such a big investment. I think you've got to have some time on your hands. I think that's the problem.
It's interesting, isn't it? People often take issue with films that are too long, but would binge watch like 7 or 8 hours of a TV series. I mean, I don't know whether kind of the long form narrative that's sort of come back into vogue in these kind of bingeable TV series is engineering people to be more prepared for these longer epic films with these many strands. It's an interesting one. It's certainly not something necessarily people want to see at the cinema, but certainly at home, I would think that there's a bit more of an appetite for that.
It's a good point because I think what we're seeing now with studios like Netflix is that they're allowing filmmakers and directors to make longer films. I mean, you've got to look at not just Netflix, but you've got The Irishman that was 3 hours long. You've got we watched Eurovision last night. That was 2 hours long. And then, you've
2 hours you'll never get back.
Yeah, 2 hours. Christ. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Is it Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? I've got that right, haven't I? The latest Tarantino. And that's 2.5, 3 hour film, isn't it? From what I gather, that's long.
I think the best thing to do is just not check the runtime. Just watch the film.
Yeah.
But no, actually, I take that instantly back as soon as that's out of my mind, because obviously with this film, check the runtime. If it's a 2 hour, 20 minutes one, just bin it off and wait. And hopefully the director's cut will be on TV at some point and you can watch that. Although if it's on TV, we have advert breaks in it. And that would be like 5 hours long.
Oh, God, yeah.
What's interesting about the difference between the theatrical and director's cut is I think the theatrical cut came out in May, and the director's cut, I think it had a very limited, probably kind of a token cinema run, probably a few screenings, and of the same year. And I think critics were just a bit baffled as to just how transformative that different version was and just why he hadn't done that version to begin with. I mean, it's clear now when you sort of, the benefit of hindsight, you look back and see the kind of films that people wanted this to be or to market it as. But it is strange that a decision like that would kind of two versions in the same year. I mean, I know Ridley Scott was very keen on the DVD. I'm talking about DVDs in the present tense, on the DVD format, and obviously having done the Blade Runner director's cut, which was incredibly popular, sort of did director's cut versions of several films with mixed results. But this one is the one that is genuinely, it does make this a completely different film.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because like, you know, we're not talking about a first-time director that got browbeaten by a production, you know, by their studio. This is Ridley fucking Scott, and even he had to cow down to the studio. And it's like, what chance? I mean, we're reviewing all these films, and you know, they're first, second-time directors, and it's like, how close to their original vision do these films actually turn out to be? If someone like Ridley Scott can't get, especially like, you know, after Gladiator, which was a long film, you know, how could he not have got this out in the format that he wanted it to be? Because clearly he wasn't happy with it.
I think, I mean, on paper, it had all the hallmarks of being, you know, a sort of a return to all the elements that made Gladiator such a successful film, perhaps minus a more charismatic lead. But so I can only assume that there was some studio pressure to take away the more sort of mediative elements in it, and
definitely
make it to refine it, and just to make it more battles. And it's very, the extra bits are generally quite talky, and when they're not quite talky scenes that sort of deepen your understanding of the dynamics and the kind of religious obsession, you know, divinity and divine purpose versus personal, you know, purpose, and you know, looking for retribution and all these kind of complicated elements. When it's not doing those things, it's also propelling the plot in really fundamental ways that not having that there makes, as you say, some bits make absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
Let's look at Twitter. Very often we do sort of tweet about what films we're going to put on, and we've got a couple of comments with regards to this, and they both exactly say the same thing in terms of the director's cut. Darren Cooper says, director's cut is stunning, adds so much more to the story. And Steve George says, DC, or director's cut, I'm guessing, is the only version of that film. I'm guessing is the only version of that film that you should watch. But it's too late now because we haven't watched that one.
or it's the only version of the film he will acknowledge as existing.
Yeah,
no. I think there are positives to the original version. I mean, let's be honest. I should preface this by saying that I even liked, or quite liked, Exodus, with Christian Bale. Whenever he does these films, they look staggering, and you can watch a lot of films from that period where CGI sort of augmented and supplemented a lot of films, and now looks a little bit ropey. I'm sure there's, you know, some bits in Gladiator where some of those crowd scenes and the kind of arenas don't look quite as good as they did, you know, 15 or 20 years on. But I think visually it really stands up as being fairly extraordinary. I think it's got a pretty beautiful score. The performances are still good, but you know, as a film that you are investing that much time in, even at the theatrical cut, if you're going to invest that much time and it kind of confounds you by very, you know, quite often not making sense and kind of jumping around, and you're going, why has this happened? It would really annoy people. And similarly, having to spend so much time with a main character that you don't really particularly buy into as being this dynamic leader, that's not the ideal either.
I just wanted to bring up a couple of things on my notes before we sort of move on to the Matt's rant segment of the podcast. And there was two things really. One is that I agree with you, James, what you're saying earlier on is about the score is lovely, and it's got everything you want from a sweeping soundtrack of this kind of movie, and it really lifts the movie along beautifully. I think that's something to celebrate. And the other thing as well is the amount of times characters refer to God's will was starting to get on my nerves, because if everything is down to God's will, then really why have we not carried that through into present day? Because the amount of times I get blamed for doing stuff, whereas I could just have the excuse, well, you know, it's God's will. Like I ate all the Maltesers, or I finished off the last of the bottle of wine. It's like, well, it was God's will, and why can't I get away with that anymore?
I don't want to counteract a point about Maltesers with something quite serious, but I think one of the things you have to also bear in mind is when this film came out, and in the post 9/11 landscape, depictions of, the Muslim characters and their relationship with their religion and, the sort of divine purpose. I think the reason I think that they probably over-labor that point is because it is really the main kind of point of the film. We talked about the cinematography being really beautiful. I think it makes Jerusalem look like a place that two different armies, two different religions would battle incessantly for. It successfully does that, I think. And I think the film is very much about, personal purpose and sense of purpose and this kind of broad religious purpose. And I think, perhaps it kind of overplays the point and hammers you over the head with it a little bit. But there is kind of a depth to it that makes it an interesting film, especially given when it came out.
Well, I'm definitely going to use that, regardless of all the historicalness, again, and you made some very valid points there, but I'm definitely bringing that saying into this century, and I'm going to be using it every opportunity going forward, because I think, if you do accidentally not flush the toilet after going, then it is God's will. So, right, Matthew, go on then, let's hear it. I bet you've got about 1,000 notes left to talk about.
There was just a few. So, like on his boat journey over to Jerusalem, a lot happened when he was asleep, didn't it? Because you saw him go into a bit of a storm. He went to bed. He woke up on the beach. Literally everyone else is dead.
You've not had a night out like that before.
Well, I never found a horse. That's for sure. So he just kind of woke up like, oh, that was a bit of a weird one. And utter devastation all around him, just bits of boat knocking around. We mentioned obviously how great Jerusalem looks and the vistas, and the use of extras, by the way, we have to talk about is amazing. There's a billion extras in this, and you can't see the cut between, obviously where they duplicate the CGI ones and stuff, because must have used hundreds of thousands of extras. The other thing they use an awful lot of is animal noises. The bit where he goes into Jerusalem, and it's one of those things. I'm sure it was just an ambience thing, but once you kind of start focusing on the sheer myriad of animal noises, you can't hear anything else. It's like he's just walking around, it's like it's like fucking Old MacDonald's farm.
Is it like one of those children's playbooks where you've got the buttons on the side and there's just some kids mashing the sound effect buttons?
Yeah, it's like we haven't even got to the bit where, and the thing is, you can't see any of these animals anywhere on scene. You could just hear fucking chickens going off. He mentions that it's the kingdom of conscious. He wants to be conscious. He's mentioning this whilst he's smashing a married woman. He picks his battles where it comes to being conscientious about things.
It's Legolas.
It's what he wants, right?
Yeah.
And finally, the other thing that's kind of made me was a bit annoyed is the king, his mask. He had a really faint goatee drawn on it. I was like, why would you do that? Like,
that's not in the director's cut.
Oh gosh.
It's a little. It's different. It's a little flavour saver. They changed it to those little new metal beards underneath, like Fred Durst.
But it's the tiniest bit of fake metal stubble, and it's either go full metal beard or go with a very youthful silver mask. You could barely see it, and I was craning to have a look at the tiny weird goatee.
Now I want to see a film called Full Metal Beard as well.
I was going to say, either that or it's Judas Priest's comeback album, isn't it?
Full Metal Beard.
Thanks, Matt, for that. That was inspirational. I mean, look, I think we've been a little bit mean about this movie. I mean, I certainly feel like I should have paid a lot more attention than I did, because James has come on and he's really fought for this, and he's been so eloquent in terms of trying to, explain the story to me as I didn't potentially take it in as Candy Crush. That I had literally had to finish this level on Candy Crush.
Oh mate!
and I had.
Hang on a second. Is it 2005 now? Has the film just come out?
Tell me, I'm not the only one.
What level are you on?
I can tell you. Telling me you don't still play Candy Crush. Am I the only person still?
I'd never started playing Candy Crush, unfortunately, so I don't think I can still.
Have I embarrassing myself again?
I've never played Candy Crush.
How can you not play?
At all.
It's amazing. I mean, it just has so much to give. Now, listen, I'm on level 1081, and there's so many.
Sounds excessive.
There's a lot of Candy Crush levels.
Can I just say, you begrudge watching a 3-hour plus film, but you play more than 1,000 levels of Candy Crush. I think you need to check out your priorities.
I think
as the host of a movie podcast.
You've lost days of your life to that.
Yeah, yeah, but they're good. They're days well spent.
You should have given this film at least your attention because
I did. I promise. I only did a little bit of Candy Crush
because it does look stunning, and I think even the theatrical cut with a stronger lead, and the problem is as we mentioned before, the cast around him is amazing. I mean, even Michael Sheen in the first opening 5-10 minutes is he's a fantastic actor.
Yeah,
and you just kind of the whole way through it, you're always kind of going, if only this wasn't Orlando Bloom. And if the director's cut takes the focus away from him, then that's got to be good. We are reviewing 2 different films here, buddy.
That's the good thing to always put into perspective is that it's 2007. The movie was released. Is that right?
I think it's 2005.
2005. Yeah. So essentially, we can look back at these movies and knowing that we know now in terms of the director's cut being available and what filmmakers are up against all the time in terms of trying to get their art and their craft the way they want it, and not every other film that comes out or every sort of film magazine you read or every podcast you listen to, you're always hearing about the stories of how difficult it is for filmmakers to do what they want. And so we know now, looking back in hindsight with films like this, that actually, yes, they deserve to be watched in the way that they were intended to be watched. And I guess it's fine to have this movie, critically panned as quite rightly it should be in terms of some of the way it's put together. But it's not down to Ridley Scott, and it's not down to anybody that's in it and the effort and everything that's gone into it. So, it's.
But I just had a conspiracy theory thought.
Yeah,
is what if Ridley Scott did this on purpose to double up his DVD sales?
Oh, yeah, but he does this a lot, doesn't he?
He does this a lot.
It feels like a very laborious way of doing it, and costly. And I definitely think now is definitely the time in this climate for more conspiracy theories.
There's just not enough around, right? It's almost like someone's taken them all away somehow.
Exactly.
Well, I think we definitely have to jettison this movie out of the bunker for everyone.
Well, but we didn't see this movie. Is the problem? I saw the theatrical cut. You watched Candy Crush. Only James has the right to actually say whether or not this film should be free or not, because he's the only one here who's actually seen how it is the director intended. So it has to go free. It has to. Yeah,
James, thank you so much for coming on and giving this, or schooling me and Matthew on this movie. And I feel ashamed of myself. I feel thoroughly ashamed.
I absolve you of your shame, and it's been a pleasure coming on. Thank you so much.
Well, it was God's will. I mean, it's Candy Crush. It always is. James, where can we find you online and your Twitter handles and things?
My Twitter handle is Hickie Mouse, one word. There's a ridiculous story about why that is the case, but we haven't got time to share it now. And they've got various reviews and articles online, largely done for Kerrang! Magazine.
Excellent. Thanks again. And if you enjoyed the podcast and you're new to the podcast, make sure you listen and you download and subscribe, and you leave us a rating if you want to, or even a review, because we could desperately need some new reviews, because it helps us climb that ladder in terms of getting our podcast into the ears of the people out there. And go to our website, Matthew, which is
moviebunkerpodcast.com. Did I say that actually properly? Bunker.
So yeah, until next time in the bunker. Thanks again, James.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.